Olympic Weightlifting Coach course, Weightlifting Theory Part 3, Learning and Coaching the Lifts. So the objectives of this module are to review research into optimal learning techniques, provide a basic framework to both learn and coach the Olympic lifts, and provide considerations when coaching to help maximize skill and knowledge acquisition by Olympic weightlifting learners. So according to Schmidt, weightlifting is a discrete motor skill where motor control is maximized and decision making is minimal. So this differs from sports like tennis or football, where you have to make decisions in order for success to occur, i.e. which way do you need to go, what shot do you need to play, etc. So with a snatch or with a clean and jerk, the primary determinant of success is the quality of the movement itself. So the majority of coaching is about imparting the knowledge of how to correctly perform the task or exercise. So it's commonly accepted it takes between about 300 to 500 repetitions for a technique to become more automated or autonomous. So there is less conscious thought going into performing that particular task. Because the lifts, such as the snatch, are made up of discrete or different phases, learners should look to perform 300 to 500 reps of each of the separate phase exercises, such as a power shrug, as this pays dividends when trying to join these phases together. Without this dedicated and deliberate practice, some learners really struggle with the more complex or multi-phase drills or So we would classify the different stages of learning a new complex exercise, like one of the Olympic weightlifts, into 5 different stages. So we have phase 1, where you're a beginner, phase 2, an unpracticed beginner, phase 3, practiced beginner, and then phase 4, an intermediate or master, and phase 5 being elite. To help define these stages then, so a beginner we would classify as someone that cannot perform the full technique. An unpracticed beginner, they can perform the technique, but it's not autonomous. They're still really having to concentrate on it, so they've effectively done less than those 500 repetitions in order to kind of make it more natural. We then have our practice beginner that can perform the technique and it is autonomous, so they've reached that stage. And then intermediate is where a lot of people are going to sit, where the technique is then practiced for months or even years in order to become smooth and fluid or more efficient. Your elite kind of learning phase then would be when you've completed approximately 10,000 plus hours of deliberate and guided practice. So if you're in phase 1 as a beginner, so the beginners have not mastered the exercise and are in a very verbal cognitive state, which means that the learner is completely new to the task, and their initial concerns and questions are going to be things like, what am I actually supposed to be doing? What am I actually doing rather than what am I supposed to be doing? What are the kind of timings or the timing issues or the sequencing? What are the common faults that I need to be aware of? And then what is the correct stance, the correct body position, head position, grip, arm position? So individuals at this learning stage should one, practice simple part movement techniques, which is why we kind of break the movement down into these different phases. You should then look to combine with slow, complete movement techniques, and then gradually increase the speed without the loss of correct technique. And the second one, we don't want to spend too much time, which is why I've got the little asterisks there, doing these kind of slow movements, because it can have detrimental kind of carryover when we start to go into kind of quicker movements. But it is quite important for a lot of people to look at least kind of performing it for a period of time in a slow manner before they try and start kind of increasing the speed to its optimal level. Now, halting, jerky or uncertain movements are perfectly normal during this phase as learners start to be. So in this phase, the learner cannot process a lot of information. And so from a coaching perspective, you want to keep the coaching really limited with very concise teaching points or coaching cues. Verbal instructions are useful in early learning, but only if they're straightforward and direct and do not present too many concepts. So key coaching tools to help learners during this phase 1 stage are going to be that you want to keep your very concise verbal instructions or explanations. Really, the less said, the better. You also want to then be utilizing demonstrations and slow-mo videos, so again, they can kind of get an idea in their head of what they should be doing. So practical applications for coaching. Again, you want to look to explain how preparation exercises will link into the full exercise of the snatch, clean or jerk, or how these preparation exercises will link into different phases of these and effectively what the skill transfer will be. You want to keep your verbal instructions to a few key items, kind of 2 or 3 things, and you want to deliver that in less than 30 seconds before application. So what we mean by that is don't waffle on for 10 minutes because they're probably only going to remember the last kind of 2 or 3 things you say anyway. But if you're going to give instructions, give those instructions and get them to apply it, i.e. do a set of exercises straight away. Don't give them an instruction and then give them a rest for 3 minutes and then just get them to do it then because they'll have forgotten. So it's got to be, keep it concise, tell them what you want them to do and then get them to do it straight away. And again, we're going to use this whole part whole method of techniques in order to break down these complex movements. You also want to look to be able to define the key points so that the athletes can check for themselves whether they're doing these key things later in practice. Again, practical applications. During a models demonstration, the coach should cue important points to direct the learner's athlete's attention to the most relevant aspects of the performance. So effectively, if you're getting a third person, a model to demonstrate something, again, the coach just really needs to be able to highlight, okay, look at what they're doing at their knees, look at what their hips are doing, they're doing this, they're doing that, in order to kind of, again, show the positive attributes that they are being demonstrated. Suggesting what to ignore during demonstrations can also be helpful in order to direct attention correctly. So if someone is doing the full movement, it's a lot of information. So again, you may say, right, just focus on what they're doing with their knees or what they're doing with their hips and get them to concentrate on those things. You want to alternate practice with demonstrations and feedback in order to help facilitate recovery. So don't just drill them rep after rep after rep. We need to get them to practice it because that's important, but we also need to kind of reinforce what we want them to look at and get them to do, and kind of getting them to watch demonstrations in between their practice is quite helpful. You want to have learners face away from mirrors during learning, particularly with Olympic lifting, as it will promote more kinesthetic awareness for self-analysis. So what we're saying is, if a learner's looking at themselves in the mirror, they're trying to get that visual feedback, we kind of want them to face away so they can start to feel what they're doing correct or incorrect. You want to consider the individual's preferred learning styles when teaching them new exercises, and you want to adapt your communication and training method depending on the individual, which will help to develop rapport between you and them. So visual clients are going to prefer to see things, they'll watch your demonstrations to remember and learn their new exercises. Auditory clients are going to appreciate hearing certain technical cues, they'll remember what you say to feedback on their technique and need to hear what you want them to do. And kinesthetic clients or learners are going to prefer to actually do the exercise to learn them. They may appreciate feeling what the muscles are doing during exercise in order to help to commit it to memory. So again, you can adjust your teaching or coaching style depending on which kind of learner they tend to, or learning method they tend to migrate to. So we mentioned slow practice a few slides ago, and many coaches will have learners perform the complex complete exercises in slow motion in order to learn the correct techniques. And this can have a beneficial carryover, since if the movement is only slowed down slightly, then the same generalized motor program can be carried over into the full speed version. However, if the movement is slowed down too much, then the essential dynamics can be lost, and then we may get much less carryover or no carryover. So we recommend that you kind of limit slow practice to beginners only, and again for only limited periods of time. So then we are into phase 2, where we have this unpracticed beginner. So once the learner can perform the full exercise, i.e. the snatch, clean or jerk, then they will need to look to perform the 300 to 500 reps of that full movement in order to develop automaticity, so it requires less conscious effort. Consistency will gradually increase, and enhanced motor movement efficiency will help to reduce energy costs, so how much energy they waste actually performing the movement. And self-talk, which we tend to get a lot more of as in this kind of unpracticed or the kind of beginner phase, phase 1, you're going to find that becomes somewhat less important. Learners will now find their own effective cues for timing, begin to monitor their own feedback and be able to detect their own errors, and also start to develop their own style of performance. Performance and quality of movement will also improve rapidly. There will be some inconsistency from rep to rep as the athlete or learner starts to attempt new solutions or lifting styles. Practical applications for the coach, well, we want to assist them and really guide them to be able to identify or self-identify their errors. So what we don't want is a learner or an athlete being solely dependent on an external person like the coach telling them whether that was right or wrong. We want them to be able to kind of go, okay, how did that feel to you? Did you feel the brush as the bar was moving upwards? And get them to be able to start to self-identify their own errors. We also want them to understand the difference between style and technique, and then support the learner to develop their own optimal style based on their own strengths, weaknesses, and biomechanics. It's also then to support the learner to develop consistency of performing this style. And so we would do that by implementing style versus consistency sessions. So just discussing a little bit on style. Whilst learning the exercise, it is really important to practice different styles to find the one which suits you best and is also still technically correct, safe and efficient. So your style of performing the task, like lifting a weight above the head, the snatch, will depend on, as we mentioned before, your own biomechanics, strength, weaknesses, and also a kind of activity and training history. So different people will perform these exercises or movements in different ways, and finding the most suitable way for you will always be better than just copying the way that someone else does it, or trying to have a whole group of 20, 50, 100 people all trying to do exactly the same way that their coach demonstrated to them. A better coach, rather than getting everybody to do it the way that they do it, their style, would help individual learners to identify their own style. So when should the learner kind of play around with this style? That's one of the main questions we always get asked. Well, you want to try different styles, such as your stance, how wide your feet should be for both the pulling and catching phases, etc., foot position, and also different grips, and even just then different styles of kind of performing the lifts before you look to embed these neural engrams with repeated practice. So the error that a lot of people do is they kind of do loads and loads and loads and loads of practice, and then they start playing around with different style, and by that time you've already kind of really laid down a lot of these motor engrams, and then you have to kind of go back and unlearn. So before we start kind of really trying to develop consistency, once you've mastered the basic technique that you're after, then is the optimal time to start playing around with different style. So style sessions are where we can really do this, and this will involve the learner trying different styles of the movement in order to discover a more effective pattern, with the coach helping the learner eliminate what they deem to be inappropriate patterns. Like we said, this might be grip, stance, catch position, etc. Consistency sessions, on the flip side, are what we look to do to kind of really lay down these motor engrams and develop consistency, as the name suggests. And this is going to involve repeating what is currently successful and also having them demonstrate to a coach a set using their best estimate of the movement pattern of their most proficient performers. So what we're looking at here is style sessions. We're going to really try and play around with different styles and actually kind of do things differently to try and find, is there a more effective way of performing this movement? Whereas consistency is kind of the other end of the spectrum, while we try and repeatedly do the same thing in order to develop efficiency through kind of decreased neural inhibition. So on to learning phase 3, where we have our practice beginner. So once the learner has found the most efficient style of performing the task and has completed, as we said, about 300 to 500 reps of the technique, then you're going to find that task has become more autonomous or just more natural. It's important that the style experimentation occurs before this automaticity occurs. Otherwise, it's just a little bit more difficult to alter an embedded motor engram. Not impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of easier to do it before we start really laying down these neural pathways. So during this phase, automaticity has occurred, movements have become more fluid, performance of the tasks does not take significant attention or cognitive attention, You're going to find the learner's self-confidence increases, and their capability to detect one's errors becomes much more developed. Practical applications from a coaching perspective, you want to focus more on fine-tuning the techniques, and this is where depth of technical knowledge of the coach becomes even more important. The individual is guided on the weaker areas of their task or lifts, and therefore what they need to kind of focus on. So they might have a really good first pull, but not so great through the transition phase. Again, you can employ models and demonstrations to show common mistakes, ineffective form, faulty strategy. And again, we also want to look at withdrawing guidance as soon as the learner can perform the skill independently, in order to avoid a learned dependence. And again, what we mean by that is that the learner is dependent upon you for feedback. We need them to be able to self-analyze. So on to learning phase 4, this kind of intermediate master phase. So it's a continuation of phase 3. The lifts are practiced for months or years to become as smooth or as fluid and as efficient as possible. Significant improvements in performance will be slow, but are still possible with deliberate practice. And there is a difference between practice and deliberate practice. Deliberate practice means you're really trying to analyze what you're doing and always strive for greater improvements, rather than just kind of practicing the same old thing that you do all the time. So improved automaticity, reduced physical, mental effort, improved style or form, increased concurrent strength, which we'd get from doing assistant exercises like front squats, back squats, deadlifts, etc., are all possible during this phase. Coaching is going to be focused on the continued supervision of the lifts and subtle fine-tuning. And then into phase 5, a kind of elite level. So again, it's an approximation, but 10,000 hours of deliberate and guided practice can allow a lifter to reach elite or world-class levels. So for individuals that wish to specialise to an elite level, this will obviously take many years of overseen and focused training. And even then, there are no guarantees of success. Extensive and continued practical coaching and additional learning will also be required by coaches who wish to oversee these types of elite individuals. So the optimal coaching model for Olympic lifts would be focusing initially on slow tempo preparation exercises specific to Olympic weightlifting. So these may be your front squats, overhead squats, etc. And we're going to talk through these in a moment. Once we've kind of mastered these slow tempo preparation exercises, then we're looking at fast tempo preparation exercises and then linking into multiple phase exercises as well. Once we've kind of done that, then it's a progression into the complete lifts, which would be the snatch or clean from the floor and the jerk. So some coaches may adopt a top-down approach, some will adopt a bottoms-up or ground-up approach, and some will adopt a mixture, and we're going to talk through each of these. So example slow tempo preparation exercises would be our barbell Romanian deadlift with different snatch or clean grips, an actual deadlift from the ground, again same with different grips, the front and back squat, overhead squat, the overhead press, behind the neck press, and then some of the kind of linking movements, behind the neck press, then overhead squat, or behind the neck press into overhead squat. And other slow tempo preparation exercises which can be helpful, shrugs, both dumbbell and barbell. Barbell overhead shrugs, so again kind of really focusing on upper trapezius development. Barbell good mornings and split squats, pull-ups, again with different grips, windmills, Turkish get-ups, all of these can have a place helping to develop different fat sets that we can then apply into the full Olympic lifts. So the snatch coaching model, well, snatch phase 1 commences with our isolated phases. So we do our snatch balance to work on catch and recovery. We do our first pull deadlift with a snatch grip to obviously work on the first pull. Our adapted Romanian deadlift to focus on the transition. Power shrugs for the second pull. And high pulls and adapted high pulls for the second pull or combined second pull and pull under phases. Then that would develop to look to start to integrate with combined phases. So we would do the first pull deadlift to adapted Romanian deadlift or adapted Romanian deadlift into power shrugs, high pulls into muscle snatch, and then eventually progressing into things like power shrugs from the floor, adapted high pulls from the floor, adapted Romanian deadlift to high pulls to muscle snatch, and then high pulls to muscle snatch to overhead squat, as an example. Phase 1 then would then finish with the complete movement from different heights. So can you perform a power snatch from above the knee, at the knee, below the knee, and then we'd be completing phase 1 when someone can perform a power snatch from the ground. For the clean, again, same kind of thing that we follow for the snatch. Phase 1, we commence with things like drop front squats, first pull deadlifts, adapted Romanian deadlifts, power shrugs, and high pulls. Then we'd continue and develop our clean phase 1 by integrating some of these movements together, eventually progressing into the power cleans from top position above the knee and below the knee, and then eventually concluding with the power, being able to perform the power clean from the floor. Jerk phase 1 would follow the similar kind of progression model. We'd be doing different phases, so partial front squats to work on the dip and drive, keeping the bar on the shoulders, doing the dip and drive with the bar leaving the shoulders, into push press, overhead squats, overhead split squats, and then eventually kind of concluding phase 1 for the jerk, being able to perform the power jerk, the parallel stance, or the split jerk. So in conclusion, in relation to the learner, you want to look to master the slower exercises first before you look to increase the speed of movement. Break the exercise down into parts if needed. Remember, it takes at least 300 to 500 reps of an exercise to develop automaticity and fluidity. Try different styles when practicing, particularly before seeking automaticity or consistency. Practice with others, both for rest and comparison, and with regular supervision from a coach. And deliberate practice and working on guided areas is going to be the key for continued development of skills. And for the coach, for beginners, keep the instructions very concise, use demonstrations, videos, and practice. Unfluid movement is normal during early phases of learning, so jerky movement. It's perfectly normal to see when someone's just trying to get their head around what they're supposed to be doing. You also want to learn to coach the individual to find their preferred style and understand the difference between style and technique. Help develop learners' ability to self-analyze. And because of the high velocity of many Olympic weightlifting drills, use of videotapes for visual feedback is preferred over mirrors, or like I said, more appropriately nowadays, where we can kind of use our smartphones and record in slow-mo. These types of things work really, really well. Now, the individual's preferred style of learning, are they more of a visual, kinesthetic, or verbal, and alter coaching accordingly. And it's perfectly usual that someone isn't going to be 100% visual, 100% kinesthetic, 100% verbal, but you tend to find individuals migrate more towards one of those styles of learning. So you want to complete the review questions for this section to ensure you've met the learning outcomes, and then move on to the next module.